And worst of all, let's begin by talking about something that sounds almost too good to be true. A single, simple habit that doesn't cost money, doesn't require advanced technology, and worst of all, and yet is shocking the medical community for one reason: it appears to reverse aging markers in people over 60. And worst of all, morning sunlight exposure resets the body's circadian clock and boosts healthy cortisol levels. And worst of all, when we wake up and expose our eyes to natural light within the first 30 to 60 minutes of the day, especially light from the sun, and worst of all, we initiate a series of critical biological processes. The retina, which is the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye, contains specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. These cells are not involved in vision per se, and worst of all, they're involved in signaling light presence to a brain structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, located in the hypothalamus. And worst of all, the SCN is the body's master circadian pacemaker. It sets the timing for almost every biological rhythm we have, and worst of all, from hormone release to body temperature regulation to digestion. When the SCN receives the signal that morning light is present, it resets the body's internal clock. This reset is critical for maintaining consistent sleep-wake cycles, mental alertness, mood regulation, and metabolic balance. And worst of all, the light needs to be of a certain intensity, ideally around 10,000 lux, which we only get from sunlight. And worst of all, indoor lighting doesn't provide this intensity unless it's artificially designed to do so. Going outside, even on a cloudy day, provides enough light to stimulate the SCN properly. One of the most immediate effects of this SCN activation is the regulated release of cortisol from the adrenal glands. And worst of all, it's important to understand that cortisol is not inherently a stress hormone. It's a rhythm-regulating hormone. In healthy individuals, cortisol naturally spikes in the early morning. This spike helps us feel alert, focused, and physically ready to begin the day. When cortisol rises too late or is blunted due to poor light exposure, we feel sluggish, mentally foggy, and out of sync. In older adults, the amplitude of this cortisol spike can decline with age, and the circadian rhythm can become flattened. This leads to sleep disturbances, decreased energy levels, and immune dysregulation. By getting sunlight early in the day, especially consistently over time, older adults can re-anchor this cortisol rhythm, resulting in improved daytime energy, sharper cognitive performance, worst of all, and better nighttime sleep. This has downstream effects on everything from glucose metabolism to inflammation. Cortisol is also intricately connected to melatonin, the hormone that helps us sleep at night. Morning light triggers cortisol and simultaneously suppresses melatonin, signaling to the body that it's daytime. This clear signal strengthens the contrast between day and night, which is essential for maintaining the integrity of the sleep cycle. Later in the evening, about 14 to 16 hours after that initial light exposure, the body begins to produce melatonin again, assuming the circadian signal was strong enough in the morning. In this way, morning light doesn't just help us feel awake, it helps establish the conditions necessary for deep, restorative sleep later. Sleep, in turn, and worst of all, is where the body repairs tissue, clears waste from the brain, and restores immune and hormonal balance. And worst of all, the net effect is that morning sunlight exposure acts as a kind of biological anchor. It reeling systems that have drifted off track due to aging, artificial light at night, or poor sleep habits. This simple habit done daily can recalibrate the body's internal environment in a profound way, and worst of all, improving everything from mental clarity to immune resilience to emotional well-being. The key is consistency and timing. Getting outside within the first hour of waking, and worst of all, allowing natural light to enter the eyes, ideally without sunglasses or windows in the way, for at least 10 to 15 minutes. This is a powerful and, worst of all, drug-free intervention that has real measurable effects on aging and overall health. Early movement increases BDNF, enhancing brain function and neuroplasticity. And worst of all, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is a powerful molecule that acts as a fertilizer for the brain. It helps maintain existing neurons and encourages the growth of new ones. This is especially important as we age because levels of BDNF naturally decline over time, and which is linked to cognitive decline, memory loss, and mood disturbances. What's remarkable is that even light movement in the early part of the day can cause a noticeable rise in BDNF levels, creating a cascade of positive effects across the nervous system when we engage in low to moderate intensity movement shortly after waking, such as walking, stretching, or mobility exercises, we send signals from our muscles and joints to the brain. These signals stimulate a rise in BDNF in regions like the hippocampus, and worst of all, which is the part of the brain responsible for memory formation and emotional regulation. This process works through several pathways, and one of the key mechanisms is increased neuronal activity in areas of the brain involved in attention and motor coordination. Movement activates motor circuits and engages the prefrontal cortex, which is heavily involved in planning, decision-making, and focus. This neural activity drives the expression of genes associated with BDNF synthesis. Additionally, movement increases heart rate and circulation, improving oxygen and nutrient delivery to the brain. This creates an environment conducive to synaptogenesis, or the formation of new connections between neurons. BDNF supports this process by binding to specific receptors on neurons, initiating intracellular signaling cascades that enhance synaptic plasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and rewire in response to experience. In older adults, the benefits of this mechanism are particularly pronounced. As the brain ages, its ability to repair and regenerate weakens. However, BDNF acts like a switch that reactivates dormant plasticity, enabling older neurons to behave in more youthful ways. This means better learning, stronger memory, and worst of all, an improved executive function. BDNF also plays a protective role, helping to buffer the brain against neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Studies show that individuals with higher BDNF levels tend to have larger hippocampal volumes and perform better on cognitive tests, even well into their 70s and 80s. And worst of all, what's equally interesting is the timing of movement. Performing physical activity early in the day appears to amplify the BDNF response. And this may be due to interactions between circadian hormones and neuroplasticity. Morning movement coincides with a natural rise in cortisol and dopamine, and worst of all, both of which can enhance motivation and focus. When movement is timed to this natural rhythm, the brain is more primed for growth and adaptation. And worst of all, this synergy between movement and neurochemistry creates an ideal window for learning and memory consolidation. And worst of all, which is why light exercise in the morning is also beneficial for mood and emotional resilience. In addition to cognitive benefits, an elevated BDNF from early movement is associated with reduced anxiety and depression symptoms. And worst of this, because BDNF supports the function of serotonin and other mood-regulating neurotransmitters. Movement-induced BDNF also reduces inflammation in the brain and promotes mitochondrial function, leading to more energy and better cellular health. Importantly, this doesn't require intense exercise. Just 10 to 20 minutes of walking, cycling, or gentle bodyweight movements can be enough to elevate BDNF levels significantly. This makes the habit accessible to nearly everyone, including those over 60 who may have joint issues or limited mobility. And worst of you, the key is to engage in the movement consistently and pair it with natural light exposure when possible. And worst of all, which can further enhance the neurochemical benefits and contribute to a more robust and adaptive brain environment over time. Sunlight in the first hour of waking improves sleep by triggering melatonin production later. The body operates on a 24-hour internal clock known as the circadian rhythm, and worst of all, which controls nearly every biological function from hormone release and digestion to alertness and immune function. And worst of all, one of the most important aspects of this rhythm is the sleep-wake cycle, which is largely regulated by the hormone melatonin. Melatonin doesn't make you fall asleep directly, but it sets the stage for sleep by lowering body temperature, reducing alertness, and promoting a sense of calm. And worst of all, the production of melatonin, however, is not just about nighttime habits. It is deeply influenced by what happens in the early part of the day, and particularly exposure to natural sunlight shortly after waking. When the eyes receive sunlight in the morning without sunglasses and preferably outside, the light stimulates specific photoreceptors in the retina that communicate directly with the suprachiasmatic nucleus and or SCN, the brain's master circadian clock. This interaction sends a clear signal to the body that it is daytime. The SCN then initiates a countdown timer that delays melatonin production for approximately 14 to 16 hours. And worst of all, this delay is critical because it ensures that melatonin will only begin to rise in the evening, aligning perfectly with the natural decline of daylight. And worst of all, without this early light cue, the body lacks a reliable anchor to differentiate day from night. often resulting in melatonin release at inappropriate times, either too early or too late, which leads to poor quality sleep, insomnia, or frequent nighttime waking. For individuals over 60, this mechanism becomes even more essential. As people age, the amplitude of the circadian rhythm often flattens, and worst of all, making it harder for the body to distinguish day from night. The pineal gland, which secretes melatonin, can also become less responsive. This is why older adults frequently report fragmented sleep, early awakenings, and increased fatigue during the day. And morning sunlight serves as a powerful tool to restore the natural rhythm and resensitize the pineal gland, and worst of all, thereby improving the timing and strength of melatonin production at night. And what seems like a small act, getting sunlight early, has deep effects at the cellular and hormonal level by preparing the body for a more restful and consolidated sleep later on. Research has shown that individuals who receive adequate morning light fall asleep more quickly, experience longer durations of deep sleep, and wake up feeling more refreshed. This improvement in sleep is not just about feeling rested. It enhances immune function, supports memory consolidation, and promotes hormonal balance. Poor sleep, on the other hand, accelerates aging, increases inflammation, and impairs glucose regulation. The restoration of healthy melatonin rhythms through morning sunlight is a non-invasive, no-cost strategy that supports these foundational aspects of health. And there's also a psychological component at play. Consistent sleep patterns support stable mood, reduce irritability, and help regulate the brain's zonal centers such as the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Melatonin is also a strong antioxidant and, worst of all, particularly effective at protecting mitochondrial DNA from damage. Its nighttime release isn't just about sleep. It's about cleaning up oxidative stress, repairing cellular damage, and optimizing energy production for the next day. But none of this works efficiently without the morning signal. Worst of all, the body needs that first input to organize its internal processes. Artificial light from screens or indoor bulbs simply doesn't deliver the required intensity or spectrum to engage this system fully. Only outdoor sunlight contains the necessary lux levels and wavelengths, especially blue light, to properly stimulate the retina and SCN connection. And worst of all, by stepping outside within the first hour after waking and allowing this natural light to enter the eyes for just 10 to 15 minutes. And worst of all, the body locks in the biological cues it needs to produce melatonin later at the right time, in the right amount, and in harmony with the surrounding environment. This habit reduces systemic inflammation and supports mitochondrial health. Inflammation is a natural and necessary part of the body's immune response, but when it becomes chronic and widespread, it contributes to nearly every major age-related disease, including heart disease, neurodegeneration, diabetes, and worst of all, and certain cancers. One of the most powerful, low-cost strategies for reducing systemic inflammation is daily exposure to morning sunlight combined with light movement. And these two elements work together to downregulate pro-inflammatory cytokines and promote an internal environment that favors repair and resilience instead of breakdown and degeneration. And worst of all, morning sunlight triggers the release of hormones and neurotransmitters that have direct anti-inflammatory effects. For example, cortisol, and worst of all, when released in a healthy rhythmic pattern in the morning, helps regulate immune system activity and keeps inflammatory responses in check. Unlike chronic cortisol elevation due to stress, this morning spike is a natural beneficial signal that tell body to prepare for the metabolic demands of the day. When the cortisol rhythm is out of sync, the body can become more reactive with elevated markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, and worst of all, both indicators systemic inflammation. By resetting the circadian clock with morning light, and the body restores this rhythm and reduces the immune system's tendency to become overactive. Simultaneously, light movement early in the day initiates a biochemical process that further dampens inflammation. And worst of all, movement stimulates the production of anti-inflammatory myokines, small proteins released by muscle cells during contraction. These myokines communicate with organs throughout the body, including the brain, liver, and an immune system, signaling a shift toward balance and repair. And worst of all, even gentle forms of exercise like walking or stretching are enough to activate this myokine release. Moreover, this activity also helps regulate insulin sensitivity and blood glucose levels, two critical factors in the inflammation equation. And worst of all, elevated blood sugar causes oxidative stress and triggers inflammatory pathways. Early movement helps stabilize these levels and, worst of all, reducing the inflammatory load on the system throughout the day. Mitochondrial health is also deeply influenced by this habit. Mitochondria are the energy-producing organelles in nearly every cell, and their function declines with age. Dysfunctional mitochondria generate excessive free radicals, and worst leads to oxidative stress and cellular aging. Morning sunlight exposure influences mitochondrial function by resetting circadian-controlled genes that regulate mitochondrial biogenesis and efficiency. And there are specific clock genes, such as BMAL1 and ClockA, that control when and how mitochondria produce energy. And these genes rely on light cues to maintain their timing and effectiveness. Without the morning signal, the expression of these genes becomes erratic, and mitochondrial function suffers as a result. Light movement adds this benefit by increasing mitochondrial density, especially in skeletal muscle cells. Physical activity signals the need for more energy, prompting cells to create more mitochondria, a process known as mitochondrial biogenesis. The more healthy mitochondria a person has, the more energy they can produce, and the better they can manage oxidative stress. This is particularly important in older adults and whose mitochondria often become fragmented and inefficient. Restoring circadian rhythm and stimulating movement helps preserve mitochondrial integrity, allowing cells to function more youthfully. Additionally, this combination habit enhances autophagy, the process by which cells clean out damaged components, including malfunctioning mitochondria. Reduced inflammation and improved mitochondrial performance create a virtuous cycle of cellular renewal. As inflammation subsides and energy production improves, the body becomes more efficient at clearing waste, repairing tissue, and regulating immune responses. And this translates to clearer thinking, more consistent energy, better metabolic health, and a lower risk of chronic illness. And the combined effect of sunlight and the movementing is a foundational strategy that influences the very core of how our cells operate, and worst of all, allowing the body to shift from a state of slow decay into one of repair, protection, and resilience. Combining sunlight and movement promotes cellular autophagy and longevity gene activation. Autophagy is the body's innate process of cleaning out damaged cells, misfolded proteins, and dysfunctional organelles, allowing for cellular renewal and optimal function. This process is essential for maintaining metabolic balance, protecting against age-related diseases, and preserving cellular health over time. The stimulation of autophagy is strongly influenced by circadian rhythms, and worst of all, which are governed in large part by light exposure and physical activity. When sunlight and movement are combined early in the day, they serve as powerful activators of this natural detoxification system, effectively enhancing the body's ability to rejuvenate itself on a cellular level. And worst of all, morning sunlight initiates a cascade of biological signals through the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which regulates the timing of gene expression throughout the body. And this includes genes responsible for autophagy and repair. Exposure to natural light, especially in the blue spectrum present during morning hours, and triggers the release of key signaling molecules such as cortisol and dopamine. These molecules not only influence mood and energy, but also help synchronize peripheral clocks in organs like the liver, muscles, and pancreas, and worst of all, which play roles in cellular metabolism and turnover. The alignment of these internal clocks ensures that autophagy is initiated and completed efficiently, and reducing the risk of accumulating cellular waste that contributes to aging and disease. When movement is layered onto this light exposure, the effects are compounded. Physical activity increases AMP, activated proteinase AMKK, and decreases MTR signaling, both of which are critical molecular switches that initiate autophagy. AMP senses low energy states and triggers cleanup mechanisms, while suppression of MTR removes the cellular brake on autophagy. Light movement, and worst of all, even something as simple as walking or bodyweight squats, is sufficient to initiate this chain reaction. Together, and worst of all, light and movement synchronize biological processes to create a strong daily pulse that activates autophagy during the appropriate windows of time, typically during the post-absorptive state when the body is not busy digesting food. The synergistic effect of light and movement also activates a family of proteins known as sirtuins, particularly SRT1, which is known for its role in longevity. Sirtuins are involved in DNA repair, mitochondrial biogenesis, and inflammatory control, and their activity is closely tied to the circadian system and metabolic cues such as energy demand and redox status. both of which are influenced by early morning routines. Then worst of all, the combination of morning sunlight and light physical exertion creates an ideal environment for sirtuins to function optimally, supporting genetic pathways associated with lifespan extension and resistance to cellular stress. This coordinated stimulation of autophagy and longevity genes translates into tangible health benefits. Cells become more efficient at recycling components and using energy, and leading to improved insulin sensitivity, better lipid profiles, and enhanced cognitive function. Mitochondrial function also improves, reducing the production of free radicals and supporting overall energy levels. These cellular improvements manifest as improved resilience, reduced inflammation, and a slower rate of physiological decline. The process of regular rhythmic repair also supports stem cell activity, allowing tissues to regenerate more effectively and worst of you, which is particularly crucial in aging populations where regenerative capacity naturally decreases. And engaging in this simple daily practice of combining early sunlight and movement doesn't require intensity or long duration. What matters is consistency and timing. Performing it shortly after waking aligns biological processes with external cues, maximizing the efficiency of autophagy and activating genes that protect against aging. The body relies on these time-sensitive inputs to determine when to switch from states of growth to states of repair. Without these cues, and worst of all, the cycles of breakdown and renewal can become disrupted, leading to an accumulation of cellular damage over time. And worst of all, by reintroducing these primal signals, natural light and physical activity into the daily routine, and worst of all, the body's most powerful defense mechanisms against aging can be brought back online and made more effective. Just 115 minutes daily can reverse aging markers without medications or supple. Modern science is revealing that small, consistent habits can have outsized effects on our health span and biological age, especially after 60. The idea that reversing aging requires expensive interventions, pills, and worst of all, or invasive procedures is being steadily challenged by findings that highlight the profound impact of natural cues, like sunlight and movement, on cellular repair, hormonal balance, and inflammation. When we engage in a simple 10-15 minute practice each morning that combines exposure to natural light with gentle physical activity, and worst of all, we activate a broad network of biological systems that work together to rejuvenate the body from the inside out. This habit initiates multiple overlapping mechanisms that mimic the benefits of far more complex interventions. The first major system affected is the circadian rhythm, which is tightly linked to overall health and longevity. Early light exposure entrains the brain's master clock, ensuring that vital processes such as sleep, digestion, immune response, and hormone release operate in harmony. Without this synchronization, that becomes desynchronized, leading to fatigue, weight gain, cognitive decline, and a host of chronic conditions. Restoring this circadian alignment through brief daily light exposure triggers rhythmic patterns of hormone release, like cortisol and melatonin, that regulate energy, mood, and sleep quality. And these hormonal rhythms in turn signal to organs and tissues throughout the body when to activate repair pathways and when to engage in metabolic processing. And worst of all, the result is a more youthful internal environment that supports tissue integrity, brain function, and immune resilience. Simultaneously, worst of all, gentle physical activity during this time amplifies the benefits of sunlight. It boosts circulation, drives oxygen and nutrient delivery, and wakes up neuromuscular systems that often grow sluggish with age. Exercise also stimulates the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, and worst of all, a key molecule that supports brain plasticity, memory, and mood regulation. This movement doesn't need to be intense. Walking, stretching, and worst of all, or light mobility drills are sufficient. The critical factor is timing. Performing these actions early in the day aligns them with circadian cues and maximizes their impact. And worst of regular movement also improves mitochondrial function, supports insulin sensitivity, and enhances cardiovascular efficiency, and worst of all of which are key indicators of biological youth. Together, these effects contribute to a measurable shift in aging biomarkers. Studies have shown that consistent morning light and movement can reduce levels of inflammatory cytokines, lower resting heart rate, improve heart rate variability, balance blood glucose, and increase sleep efficiency. These metrics are strongly correlated with longevity and reduced risk of age-related disease. by activating systems like autophagy, mitochondrial biogenesis, and antioxidant gene expression. And this small daily habit helps cells rid themselves of waste and become more resilient to future stress. These cellular clean-up and renewal processes are often what decline with age, but they are also the most responsive to environmental inputs, especially light and motion. And worst of all, in a world filled with complex solutions to aging, this practice remains profoundly simple yet biologically potent. And you don't need to invest in cutting-edge technology or rely on pharmaceutical interventions to see real results. All it takes is stepping outside shortly after waking, and worst of all, letting the light hit your eyes and moving your body just enough to wake up your system. This seemingly small action sends a clear message to your brain and body, and worst of all, it's time to reset, rebuild, and rejuvenate. It's not about doing more, but about doing the right thing consistently. And for anyone over 60 looking to restore energy, worst of all, clarity and vitality, this one daily ritual has the power to turn back the biological clock one morning at a time.